Thank you everybody for watching the BFS the JOURNEY episodes. I'm going to finish off with a Q&A. Thought I'd invite on Tom Moir of FFS Lures and Ash Costa of massive Fenland Perch fame. And we're going to throw up a few questions to those two guys, and I'm going to add my 2 penny worth as well. It's questions that have popped up from viewers and questions that Tom in particular gets on his website. Make sure you watch to the end of the video, because Tom's kindly given me a promo code where you get 10% off an order. So let's not waste any time and fire off straight into the questions. Do you use Braid or Fluorocarbon on your main line?
I used to use Braid a lot, but I'm near enough always Fluoro now, apart from top water, which I now use mono. I think Braid is a good all-rounder because you can use it for either top water or you can use it with fluorocarbon leader fishing on the bottom. But yeah, minus top water, I'll use fluorocarbon for everything now. I tend to use Sunline Sniper as my favourite, about £5 breaking strain.
Take 2.
Braid or fluoro? Yes, both, but it depends on what I'm using. So if I'm fishing something like a Ned, I like to go with Braid to fluoro with something like a 6-foot leader. So as I'm flipping and pitching, the leader knot doesn't go into the rod. If I'm fishing drop shot or like a swim bait, then I'm using fluoro straight through, and it also helps in the winter because you're not having to tie knots if you use fluoro straight through.
I've tried both and I like both. There are pros and cons for each. Simply, I found on the shallow Fen River that I was using the BFS method, when I had fluorocarbon on, because it sank so quickly, it dragged my lures into a lot of snags, even though I was using offset hooks all the time. So I wouldn't use fluorocarbon in that situation. I'd use Braid. Fluorocarbon's really simple to use because you don't have to keep adding a leader like to the Braid like you do normally to Braid. You can just use the fluorocarbon straight through, which makes it a lot easier to use. However, I did notice as well using fluorocarbon that because of the memory of the fluorocarbon, it made it very springy on the spool. So after a few casts, it started to release itself and made it a bit volatile when casting. So the Braid was a bit more consistent to cast with. So overall, I think the answer is, depending on the situation that I'm fishing in, I would use one over the other because there's slight advantages for each. What are your go-to colours at the beginning of a session?
Go-to colours at the beginning of a session depends on what the water looks like. If the water looks coloured or heavily stained, then it's a dark colour, and in my bag will be Confusion or Junebug. If it's anything other than that, then it's going to be a natural colour, which is going to be something special or get bit. So it all depends on the conditions at the time.
Regardless of what I'm doing, any lure fishing situation, be it BFS or chucking big plastics for pike, I would always start with the lure I was catching on the session before, as long as obviously on the same water, as long as conditions hadn't changed. So if I'm on a water, the conditions are the same, and I'm perhaps fishing the second day of 3, and I've worked out what they want the day before, that's what I'll start with. Unless I've got an impression that in the morning they want a certain colour, in the afternoon they move to something else, depending on the light conditions. But that would be generally what I would do. If the water conditions had changed or I was fishing somewhere new, if it was coloured water, I'd use a dark lure. If it was clear water, I'd use a more natural colour.
Depending on the water clarity, if it's clear, I like clear lures, basically. I like white lures that are almost see-through. That is my favourite. In coloured water, I just use jet black. I prefer that. I don't complicate things too much with colour. I think you can put a lot of time and a lot of thought into it, but most of my fishing, clear water, clear, coloured water, black. In between, I tend to like a green. It's like I say, nice and simple.
Question 3 is from one of our YouTube viewers, Richard Godfrey. Great question, this, and one that really confuses people. What braid do you use and in what breaking strain? How do you get around knowing the knot strength of the braid, which is less than the stated breaking strain? Right, this is a really, really complicated answer, and not one that's going to help people very often from my point of view. I've kind of worked out what braids I like over a period of time. So if I'm talking chucking big plastic shads for pike, I tend to go overboard and use really strong braid. I've now got my hands on a very high breaking strain braid that has a very narrow weave which doesn't hold much water, so when I'm casting I don't get soaking wet hands. That's worked really well for me. BFS, I was using I think it was 1.9 kilo breaking strain nanofill, and I was very confident using that. The one thing I was very wary of, I was obviously using a fluorocarbon leader and I was using an Albright knot. I just use Albright knots all the time for connecting my fluorocarbon leader to my braided mainline, because I can tie it really accurately and well in the cold. So I know when I've gone down 9 times and come back up 5, I have to make sure my braid is interlocking in the turns that I've made on the way down. And when I wet it and pull it tight, I can see that it's either meshed in really well and it's going to be a really good knot, or if it hasn't quite gone in properly, I'll get a little bit of a loose tag or a loose loop at the bottom. I'll know how to cut it off and start again. So I've kind of worked out over the years which braids work for me, which ones don't. I'm still trying different things, and it's a bit of trial and error really, and there isn't one make that is my go-to. Like I said, the nanofill was one that I was trying on the BFS, worked really well. When I couldn't get any more of the 1.9 kilo nanofill, I just upped it and went to, I think it was a 4 kilo breaking strain. It works really well, but you've got to practice your knots. So for me, it's loads of different types, but not ability to tie accurate knots for me is more important than actually the breaking strain of the braid.
Braid wise, I mean, I still do use it on fixed spool. If I'm fishing really windy day and I don't want to be getting overruns all the time, I'll use Kariki braid from Shimano. I tend to use that about £10 breaking strain. I think it's like 4.4 kilos, so it's near enough. It's about £10. That is my sort of go-to. Connection knots, if you want the absolute strongest one, I think the FG knot will beat most others. For me personally, I think it's more important about having a knot that you can tie consistently, even on the coldest days, where it's still going to be the same. The FG knot, I find it quite fiddly. I use the Albright knot all the time. I've done it for years, and I know every time I tie it, it's the same. The FG knot, I've tried to do that on some cold days and that, and I've just given up with it and gone back to the Albright knot. If you want to know the exact breaking strain of the knot, should we say, I think the only way really you can do it is by testing it yourself to breaking points. So maybe if you've got, say, £6 line and you've connected it to, your £6 fluorocarbon leader and you've connected it to, say, £10 braid, is to maybe get some scales, tie one end to a set of scales and then just pull it and see if your line breaks before the knot. It's not something that I think is that I've never felt my connection not sort of breaking constantly, and I feel the need to really know the percentage of that knot. But like I say, for confidence in a knot, go for the FG knot. For something you can tie quickly in cold weather, go for the Albright knot. That's my personal opinion anyway.
Okay, 3. What braid do I use in what breaking strain? I tend to use the braid, like I said, with Ned lures and things like that. So I'm going for something around the £8 mark for breaking strain. However, that changes with a lot of different companies. It's very confusing, really confusing. But I use nanofill, and I've got some nanofill. I'll just read it off here, which is 2 kilos, so £4 breaking strain. And on another rod, I went retro and went with Power Pro in 3 kilos. But they're totally different lines. So I go with what I feel is a good braid that isn't going to fail. As for knot strength, I only use the FG knot. I know it's quite quick for me to tie, and that's a 99% knot strength knot. So a bit of a get around answer.
Do you have a favourite method on the BFS or light lure setup?
Do I have a favourite technique for BFS? No, they all work. The one thing I will do is I will fish on a weedless setup 99% of the time, purely because I don't want to get snagged up using such light gear. That's it.
My favourite, as in the most fun, I don't think you can beat just a standard jig head and a shad. When they're really having it in the summer, not necessarily the best for big fish, but sometimes, like say this summer just gone, there were several occasions I caught more than 100 fish in a short space of time, just taking jigs on the drop. That is probably the most fun. But for me, I would say the unpegged Texas rig, it's so versatile. It's like the all-terrain vehicle in rigs when it comes to lure fishing. You can just, there might be better options than that rig, but it can do everything okay. And like I say, some of my biggest fish this year have fallen to that. Texas rig's brilliant rig. You know, you can fish it with a big heavy lure, fish it really hard on the bottom, or you can fish it with a floating lure, let it come off the bottom slightly. It's a brilliant rig.
For me, I was using the Cheb rig and the Texas rig most of the time, mainly because of the water that I was fishing, and I suppose they were my favourite methods, and they are at the moment. However, when I got into one or two areas that I knew had some bigger fish in, the Ned was something I was really interested because I was targeting certain spots. So I think for me, my favourite method is the one that I'm actually catching on at that moment in time. How do you recover snagged lures? My answer is same as Tom Moir.
How do I release snagged lures? I ping. So first of all, I don't wind into the snag. So because I'm fishing very light and weedless, as I'm bringing the rod, moving the rod or winding, I can actually feel when I'm hitting into a snag or coming up to a fish. But if I do get into a snag, I will simply put the rod down. A lot of people ping the line through the rod eyes. I don't do that on the BFS because you're taking up a lot of tension actually just pinging through the eyes. So what I do, I then get the line and I ping it, and that's actually case in point, it's come out. So
number 5, I might just go. Tom did a really good example in his shop with a bit of line. It's about how do you recover snagged lures. I mean, do you do the same? Just get the end of the line and ting.
Yeah, try to basically catapult it out.
Yeah.
One thing that was a bit of an eye-opener for me, because I lose a lot of lures. I fish some really snaggy water, and sometimes you've just got no chance. And I was going back through my bank statements, what I've spent on various online tackle shops the last 3 months of the season. And apart from one rod that I bought, not including that, it was in the hundreds, and it was just replacing lures and jig heads. I wasn't too impressed with myself for that. But, you know, the fish are in these areas where there's loads of snags, whether it be big boulders, and sometimes you just can't get them out. You know, I try the same thing where you basically try to load your line up and then let it ping off and try to catapult it out, sort of like whatever it's hooked on. But it works sometimes, but some of them snags where in some of the areas I fish, they're lethal.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you almost know when you've hooked one, whether you're getting it back straight away or not. So, yeah, it's a bit of a sore subject, that's cost me a lot of money this season.
Do you have a favourite lure or colour for winter Fenland perch?
My answer to that would be it seems to change every year, because you'll get on one lure and you think this is amazing, and then you'll try another lure out and you catch a big fish quickly on it and you're like, oh no, this is amazing. And so I think your favourite lures are constantly changing. I think the best answer to that is whatever you use the most, you'll catch the most fish on. It's as simple as that. My favourite lure this past season, for what I did in the autumn on it, would probably be the FFS lures, the floating finesse stick. I was struggling on other lures, and that just seemed to pick out the bigger fish for me. It was a great lure. That one throughout the autumn. In the winter, I did better on the Z-Man finesse shads. That was a really effective lure for me as well. So, summer and autumn, it would have been the floating finesse stick from Tom. And that one, again, really simple. Clear water. I used just white with, I think it was blue flake in it. and in coloured water it was black with I think some like white or silver flake in it. And then same sort of colour with the finesse shads, but in the winter I think it was the dill and I can't remember the name of the black one, the Z-Man ones. I can't off the top of my head, but yeah, black and white would be for colour. And lure-wise, yeah, the floating finesse stick and the finesse shads, both brilliant lures.
Do I have a favourite colour or lure for Fenland Perch? Yes, I have. I can answer both to that one. It's the beetle craw and it's contusion. It just works. Beetle craw because it's versatile, it's small. When you flip and pitch that into cover, it goes through it. And then the colour wise, contusion in the winter time, low light conditions, generally it's going to be dirty water. That's my go-to.
On the BFS setup, mine was undoubtedly the Fang. Brilliant lure. Colour wise, again it depended on the watercolour. If it was dirty, I was using darker coloured lures and dark browns and purples. I should know the names of them, but sorry Tom, I've forgotten. And the more natural colours, I found I think it was Firefly. It was an orangey, pumpkiny one, really cool as well. But I was changing them all the time, and lots of things worked. So that's the fun element for me with the BFS. Was just trying lots of different colours, and it was amazing how many different colours worked. So yeah, they're all my favourite if they catch a big fish. How do you work out the most effective type of retrieve on any given session?
How do you work out the most effective retrieve on a day? I start with my go-to retrieve until that catches or it tells me they're not doing it. So basically what I do is my chosen lure, my chosen colour, and then I start fan casting the swim. I'll fan cast it once one way on one sort of retrieve, and then I'll fan cast it back the same way on the same retrieve, just in case I've missed a spot. If I think that swim is going to produce fish but it hasn't, I will then, instead of changing lure, I will then change the retrieve. So it might be that they don't want it dragged along the bottom, they might want it pulled slightly faster and that's a fall, or they might just want a straight retrieve. But that's how I do it. So I might do 6 different fan casts in a swim with different retrieves until one gets bit. If I don't get bit there, I'll probably look at changing the technique, so going from a bottom bait to a drop shot, and do the same, retrieve that exactly the same way through the water column. That's it.
What I found from exploring BFS is that I think I'm naturally too aggressive with it because of my pike fishing with big lure background. Even though I fish those really slowly, it's constantly moving, and with BFS you have to pause again and pause even longer. So I was always in my mind very mindful of trying to slow down my retrieve and pausing a lot. So on any given day I would be counteracting my willingness to try and get the bait moving, and what I found was actually I'm going to contradict myself slightly, on really cold days sometimes giving it a bit actually produced a response. And the converse happened when I was experimenting using Tom's prototype of the 50mm mini floating finesse sticks. With those, I found actually holding them even 30 seconds or longer, I was absolutely amazed how perch would actually target them and you get a wallop. So yeah, I think the answer to that is I just try loads of different retrieves, but consciously on BFS I try and slow myself down and put the pause in and just see what works, and then repeat. Try it again.
Again, it's just trial and error. Perfect example of this actually would have been, it's not my biggest fish of the season, but I think in stature it was one of the most impressive looking fish. I think the water temperature was about 3.5 degrees on the day. So I was trying almost dead sticking, more or less, just shaking the slack, giving it a bit of movement. I was getting nothing. There was fish striking on the surface and they didn't look big enough to be pike. So I was trying everything. I was trying suspending twitch baits sort of approach, everything I had in my tackle box basically. And in the end, I went back to drop shot, couldn't get a bite on it. So in the end, I put a paddle tail type lure on, and I basically power fished it. I fished it really quickly for about 3 or 4 yards, and I let it pause. and then I let it sink under its own weight. It's not how you would fish a drop shot traditionally, but I had 3 fish on it straight away, including a big 4. So I don't think I would have caught that fish by doing your traditional freezing cold water, slow it right down. So I know it's not a really helpful answer, but just trial and error and try other things, try different things. I think sometimes you'll do something that just sod it sort of thing, and it works. You know, I think some of the most effective retrieval styles, shall we say, on the day are almost found accidentally. You know, I think I'm convinced that's how dead sticking came about. Probably someone cast the lure out, just left it there while he had a bite on his sandwich or something, and then he picked his rod up and he had a fish on. You know, it's a lot of it is luck, and I do try to emphasise that a lot of fishing is luck. And I think that fish that I had that particular day, it was luck, because I would never have fished a drop shot in that manner before. So it was desperation times.
I think the more you go, the harder you try, the luckier you get.
Yeah. So, I agree with you there.
Ash, that's been brilliant. Thank you so much for your time today. And you're obviously busy because you're in your car, so you're obviously off somewhere or coming back, or getting some peace and quiet.
A bit of peace and quiet. If I did this up in the flat, I would have been smothered with my son and my dog, I think, within seconds. So it'll come out of the way.
Really appreciate your time. Thank you for that, buddy.
Yeah, no problem.
So I hope that helps, answers a few questions and takes you a bit further on your journey with BFS. Use the code that I'm going to put it in down here somewhere. Go and buy yourself some lures from Tom's website and go and catch some big perch. And finally, it just leaves me to say thank you for watching. Please subscribe. There'll be lots of lure fishing videos cropping up on Fenland Fishing TV over the next year, and we'll do other things as well. So soon we'll be looking at commercials, how to fish commercials, and in the summer probably doing a bit of trout fishing. So take care, get out there, get fishing. Thank you for watching.